All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Again, hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webcast on a case study of implementing and integrating NetSuite with OpenAir. My name is Joanne Casley, and I am a Client Development Manager here at GSI. Our presenter for today's webcast is Jimmy Morales, and I'll be handing it over to him in just a few minutes after we go over a couple of quick housekeeping items. First, I want to give you a chance to read our safe harbor statement. All right, and now for an agenda for today's webcast, which should last about 45 to 55 minutes in entirety. First, we'll provide a brief GSI company overview, then I'll hand it over to Jimmy for the main presentation, and at the end of the presentation, we'll go over our upcoming educational events, and then wrap up with a Q&A session. We encourage you to submit questions for the Q&A session, and you can do so through the questions panel, which is located at the bottom of the GoToWebinar console window, which should be on the right side of your screen. To minimize your GoTo console during the presentation, just click that red right-facing arrow on the top left of the console. Please note that we do address all questions at the end of the presentation. All right, and now for a brief overview of GSI. GSI is a business and technology consulting firm specializing in a variety of enterprise applications, including NetSuite, JD Edwards, Salesforce, ServiceNow, as well as all cloud and hosting services. We were founded in 2004, and we now have over 100 employees nationwide with a global reach. GSI is an Oracle Platinum partner, NetSuite solutions provider, Salesforce consulting partner, and MSP provider for Oracle Cloud, Microsoft Azure, AWS, as well as our private hosting solution. We are also a charter member of the JD Edwards Global Alliance. GSI is proud to be the only company in the industry to offer a 100% guarantee on all of our services. We are also a product development company that has many popular products, including Genius, which is an advanced monitoring and performance analytics tool that can be used with any web-based business critical system. Genesis for load, stress, and regression testing for system design, validation, or expansion. Genesis can also be used with any web-based business critical application. G Shield, which is our two-factor authentication and password reset solution for JD Edwards. Rapid Reconciler, which is our Oracle validated tool for inventory in transit and received not vouchered reconciliation. And finally, Rapid Approval, which is an enhanced user experience for Salesforce, making it easier to process a high volume of workflow approval requests and time and expense approvals. Now I'd like to introduce Jimmy Morales, who will be our presenter for today's webinar. Jimmy is a NetSuite consultant here at GSI and holds his bachelor's in organizational management. He has a background in web development and working with various ERP systems, and has experience in finance and accounting, CRM, professional services automation, and reporting and workflow configuration and customization. Jimmy is a regular presenter on our webinars as well as industry conferences like SuiteWorld. And in fact, this presentation is a replay of the presentation he did last week at SuiteWorld. So I would like to, at this time, turn it over to Jimmy.
Thanks, Joanne. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Excellent, thank you. You should be able to see my screen in just a minute here.
I can see it, yep.
Excellent. So as Joanne mentioned, this is a replay of what we covered in SuiteWorld for those who missed it and didn't get a chance to cover a really good case study for practical implementation and integration between NetSuite and OpenAir. So a little bit of background and a little bit of the agenda of what we're going to cover. We're going to establish the case study, some wants and needs, what the case is for a practical implementation between the two systems, and cover a few hurdles that were needed to be jumped along the way, some challenges, some successes, and some unique ideas to work around those hurdles. So to introduce you to the previous technology landscape, what you're looking at on the screen for this client, you're looking at an integration between Salesforce, Kimball, QuickBooks, Bill.com, and kind of a conglomerate of extracting that information through Excel and Access databases to maintain all the analysis. That's obviously not a very practical solution, and so it doesn't provide the analysis that you need to be able to get the results you're looking for. So it does establish a good case for implementing NetSuite with OpenAir as a PSA tool. And with keeping Salesforce in the picture, it requires a few different integration landscapes. So the new ideal technology landscape would be a process flow that takes project management from Salesforce, integrates it to NetSuite using Dell Boomi as an integrator. And we'll talk a little bit more about why we chose Dell Boomi as an integration piece. NetSuite being the financial housing powerhouse of the transactional information. And then of course, project management through the OpenAir PSA tool. We're also going to look at some high-level American Express integration with OpenAir with some talking points, again, challenges and successes along the way to give you a good realistic view of what that's going to look like. So looking at the detail of the integrations from Salesforce to NetSuite, we chose to use the Boomi standard connector. One of the reasons that we chose Boomi was they have a very good enablement program. So we did like the decision to go forward with them. As far as enablement goes, we'll look at what the integration actually looks like, why it's a practical solution as far as mapping field to field, why that actually worked out very well, using that mapping to create projects and establish the template project for OpenAir based on logic. And what that logic is going to look like is when an opportunity reaches, in for the sake of the example, contract stage, it'll trigger the creation of a job or project in NetSuite, and that project gets sent over to OpenAir 12 times per day, and all of that information is a one-way street. So information, say, for example, the project name, project start and end dates, who the project owners are going to be, all of that can be maintained in Salesforce. The Boomi connector can send that information over on a regular basis. We chose every 3 minutes. So as soon as there's an update, kicks that information over to NetSuite. NetSuite then is used to manage the lower level details of the project plan. And then that information 12 times per day is sent over to OpenAir, where it can be further maintained for, say, project progress, obviously the budget and cost and revenue benefit analysis, and all the project planning for resource engagement, plannings for the engagement. So what does that connection look like from Salesforce to NetSuite? Well, what you're looking at now is an example of the header level information for a project in Salesforce. The highlighted section that you're seeing here for, say, the Suite World presentation project is an in-stage qualification. Once that probability percentage or stage changes from qualification to, for our example, the contract stage, we're able to send that over to NetSuite based on that. Now that is one specific logic piece. Of course, we can integrate some other pieces. So expounding on that, we do a batch job. It's part of the master process through the Dell Boomi integrator. And it looks at some true, false, if-then type of case analysis, and it runs the project through that and says, is this ready to be sent over to NetSuite? So once it is, then it can expand on the mapping. So now what you're looking at is, again, NetSuite calls it job. So when you see the word job, it's really just project. But the NetSuite job from the Salesforce job or opportunity stage. And as you can see on the left, you've got all your Salesforce fields. So these are all the unique identifiers within the Salesforce table. And it tells us who the project owner is, who the client success manager is, who the primary contact is for the client, and so on. And in NetSuite, you've got the fields and which fields you want to marry those to on a regular basis. So you just drag and drop them over. So you can see, for example, the owner ID. It's going to look up who that user is from the owner ID using a list. So it's almost like a drop down in Salesforce, and it finds the drop down in NetSuite, and it just marries the two and sends it over on a regular basis. If it's ever updated, it knows to update that in NetSuite. So really, really powerful tool. And again, that's one of the reasons why we chose Boomi as the integrator, because they do offer that enablement. You get trained up on this, and then you can create new mappings, and that was very useful. So now looking at the integration from NetSuite to OpenAir, we use the standard NetSuite to OpenAir connector with a couple of additional API calls. So there's an extensive use of advanced mapping, and some of that custom integration that we implemented was to create some custom tables, which allowed for the words cut off here, but granulated reporting. So the advanced mapping allows you to connect using the integrated connector, which is called Suite Connect. And that allows NetSuite and OpenAir to integrate fairly seamlessly. And I use the word fairly because there is, and we're going to talk about some high-level integration points, and we'll dissect that a little bit into the detail level to see where those fields end up missing along the way, and how we used advanced mapping and leverage Suite Connect to be able to work around those integration points that are missing and create more of a seamless integration using their default tools that they give you. Now the custom tables, and we'll talk more about those in detail, are additional workarounds to where advanced mapping and Suite Connect, they have limitations in terms of what kind of tables and fields they can access. So using custom tables and custom API calls is a really great workaround to be able to get even more data into both systems. So let's look at a high-level project flow in NetSuite. On your screen, you can see you've got all your entities, a few different transaction points, and obviously the financial powerhouse that is NetSuite. You've got your vendors and employees. They can enter timesheets, and as you go clockwise, you have service items and expense items applied to the project. Runs through what they call project rules, and then you can create invoices and expense reports, and those hit your accounts, which then flow through customers, vendors, and payments, and so forth, and then the project lifecycle continues. When you implement OpenAir, it actually absorbs some of those processes almost entirely. So some of those, including timesheets, rules, and invoices, are standalone processes that OpenAir can do entirely on their own, which is why OpenAir is also offered as a standalone tool. Because we're integrating with NetSuite, we need to copy over the entity information, and we don't want to maintain it entirely out of OpenAir and have data disparity. So NetSuite then copies those missing pieces over into OpenAir. Entities, items, payments are sent over into OpenAir, and that can be done automatically, manually, and they can be updated once or every single time integration happens. If you remember, we decided that it was going to be integrated 12 times per day on the hour during business hours. So this is going to be done automatically. Some fields, we don't ever need to change them. For example, the employee name. Well, actually, employee names may change over time, but say the employee start date. That's something that you never need to change in either system. So the employee start date is a one-time copy versus an employee name, which you want to update every single time, say an employee does have a name change. So that kind of information is maintained in NetSuite and copied regularly. Once that project plan is maintained in OpenAir, transactions start to occur with time and material billing, and of course you can invoice from OpenAir. So that information is then copied back into NetSuite because it is the financial powerhouse. So it's a one-way transaction. Obviously, you don't want data disparity there when you're talking about GL impact. So once an invoice is copied over, it's marked exported in OpenAir, and you never touch it again. So that information transactionally is then sent back over into NetSuite. Now that you have two locations to maintain information, say, for example, timesheets, there's room for reporting out of both systems at two different levels. Obviously, not all timesheet information is copied over from OpenAir to NetSuite every single time. Sometimes it's just header information. And when we report that information back to clients, they may need certain level of detail. And one of the things we decided to do in NetSuite was build what we call activity sheets. NetSuite, if you're familiar with it, has a very, very powerful HTML and PDF editing tool. And in their advanced template format, you can create some very powerful documents. Because that's so powerful and OpenAir doesn't necessarily have that, we decide that we want to copy as much information over using timesheets and expenses, the information for project analysis that we have to report to our clients. We want to copy as much as we can. Not all of that is housed in the standard Suite Connect. So, introducing you to the Suite Connect side of it. This is a look at what the timesheet entry screen, timesheet mapping screen looks like in OpenAir. And as you can see, it's very similar to the Boomi connector. You've got your fields on the left for NetSuite, your fields on the right for OpenAir, and a pretty little arrow that tells you which direction it's going. So as you can see, you drag the fields where you type in the fields that you want on NetSuite, and you just pick the associated field with OpenAir. Well, one of the unique requirements we have for this case study is in time tracking, departments don't necessarily follow one-to-one. So we have to build some logic into it. So one of the things you're going to see is on the bottom right-hand section here, we have department class if statement. So this is a logic that we built, and I'll expand on this in a little bit, but this is some logic that we built to allow projects to determine whether or not the department of each time entry follows the user's department, or it follows the project's department, because we have some unique reporting requirements for that. So what does that look like? Well, we expand on the department class if statement, and just to kind of reiterate what we're talking about, here's an example, Jimmy Morales time tracking sheet. The department and business unit is NetSuite and say CPD. We want to override those fields based on some logic. So let's open up that advanced mapping logic. Here we have department class if statement. Not beautiful. In fact, you can see the highlighting, that's something that I manually added. But at the very high level, or the top level, you're seeing OpenAir fields and NetSuite. So we select our fields and we build some lookup if then logic around it. So we're saying, what's the project ID? Within the project ID, we can look up an additional field. The red fields are what we're looking up, and the blue fields are the commands that we're using to look it up. So the red field is saying, look up the project ID, find the field AppCare project, and find out if it's 1 or 0, which is a Boolean. So that's saying, is it yes for AppCare project? Then we have to build the then statement. So that little one is, here's looking at the project level in OpenAir. That little one is looking at the checkbox for managed services. So then we have to build out our then statement. So we've repurposed class to business unit, which was the field you were looking at in the time tracking table earlier. So if that is checked, then we want to find the class and look up the business unit of the project. And then if not, then maybe we want to do some additional things, and that's where the rest of this logic is built out. I don't want to bore everybody with that one. So what does that look like? Well, again, here's that time tracking field with the department being NetSuite and the business unit being CPD. Is the project managed services checkbox checked? If the answer is yes, then we want the project business unit to follow the time tracking. If the answer is no, then we want the user's business unit to follow and override that time tracking. So what does that allow for us? That allows us to have much better granular reporting, as we mentioned, at that time tracking level, and of course, invoice, vendor billing, and so on. So all of these transactions can follow the classification structure of NetSuite, which is one of the huge benefits of NetSuite. We want to really leverage that strength. So looking at some of, and don't let this overwhelm your eyes looking at the script, but this is a picture of a Suitescript that we built out that allows us to copy some table information over. Now the reason we went this route is, while the time tracking allows for departmentalization and classification for business unit structure, we may want to give granular reporting back to the client at the time tracking level. And that time tracking level leverages what are called billing rules in OpenAir. And we'll look at billing rules in more specificity in just a second here. But this is a Suitescript telling us to pull through API calls the billing rule information from OpenAir. And the billing rule information can be used to come up with budgets and actual analysis for every OpenAir client. So what does that look like? Well, in OpenAir's billing rules, as you can see, we've got a highlighted field here which says Year 3 App Care Services Quarterly. This is a very powerful tool for OpenAir to limit the type of billing that you're getting out of OpenAir, use it for budgeting, use it for actual analysis, and of course, come up with caps and everything so that you don't overbill your clients. So, as you can see on this screen, we've got cap the billing rule at 120 hours per quarter. This, in another webinar, we cover the difference between OpenAir billing rules and NetSuite billing rules, but this quarterly billing allows for us to say we're going to cut off billing at 120 hours for every single quarter. While that's very valuable, and it's one of the reasons why OpenAir was chosen over using just the NetSuite PSA module, it's not actually a reportable metric in the system. So we have our hands tied. This was a learning point for this implementation. And what that means is we have to create a custom table that copies that information over that says what's the 120 hours that we are allotted for this particular project, and how can we sum up the actuals and say, where's our budget and where's our actuals? So we'll look at this in action. So again, looking at that script, and you don't have to fully understand this, but we're using one of the Suitescript commands that builds the table called nlappy load record and create record, and we build out the table. So the table looks like this, very similar to the time tracking table. In fact, very similar to every table in NetSuite as far as layout is concerned. And we copy over that 120-hour daily cap hours. So this again is not a reportable metric in OpenAir, so we want to report out of it in NetSuite. This API call builds it out in NetSuite and allows us to get a very good detailed analysis. Now we have our budget. We have all the internal ID and all the information that we know to map it back to OpenAir, so we now know this project, billing rule named Year 3 App Care Services, has 120 hours allotted to it. We then take the transactions that are billed against it. Now, each billing rule has what are called billing transactions in OpenAir. That billing rule transaction can also be copied over in the same similar fashion that timesheets and expense items can be copied to and fro from the system. This particular one is not part of SuiteConnect, so we use the API call to build out all the billing transactions and give us what we look at over here on our right-hand column, the hour plus minute, because it does in time tracking in OpenAir gives you hours and minutes separately. So we need to sum those together, create a column, and we take the project billing rule and the project ID from OpenAir, and we build out what the mapping is for this transaction and say what's the billing rule affiliated with it. And we sum up that column. And we do that at the PDF level. So that way there's no additional table that's needed and additional information that needs to be housed elsewhere. Instead, we take that PDF, and I mentioned how beautiful the HTML and PDF can be. Of course, this is not the prime example, but this is something that will show you exactly how you can format it any way you want and put the data at any point you want on the sheet using FreeMarker. And so we were able to get your budget of 120, just copies that information from project billing rules, and it sums up that column that we mentioned, and it gives you your actuals. So it gives you that, again, more granular reporting that you don't necessarily get out of OpenAir. May require 3 or 4 different reports to get that data out of OpenAir. But if you want it client facing, well, you can build out a really nice HTML PDF template, and it gives you all that information. So we sum up that column and we're able to report it back to the client. So huge win there, and that was part of building up those custom tables. So leveraging the API calls, leveraging the advanced mapping, is not something that you might necessarily think of at the beginning of a project. So how do we get here? Well, it required a certain amount of trial and error. That trial and error means trying out where Suite Connect can do it and finding out where you hit the walls. Once we see using the OpenAir data dictionary where those fields are not accessible, that's where you start building out those API calls. But we discovered that not everything is integrated as standard. So again, Suite Connect is not something that they openly advertise as a seamless integration point, because there are certain fields that you just cannot access throughout the system. Those become enhancement requests, and that's where the API call is a great workaround. So it's a good solution for those that are looking at integration points that don't exist. Inflexible requirements, e.g. activity sheets that require a lot of customization. Those customization points can't be something that you can do in OpenAir without very heavy scripting. So leveraging the strengths out of both systems is the reason why we were able to pull in bulk information across the two. And of course, consolidating that in NetSuite allows for that pixel perfect granular custom reporting. In that class and department classification structure, again, huge selling point for NetSuite. So when we're looking at integration points from OpenAir to NetSuite, leverage that classification. That's not something that is built in as part of Suite Connect. There were some limits that should be considered. So if you go into OpenAir and you look at Suite support, in Suite Answers on the very front grid, you can see at the bottom right-hand section the NS Connector Guide. And the NS Connector Guide is a great tool, and I can demonstrate that in a little bit if anyone has any Q&A at the end of this. But that connector will give you where those API limits are, some examples on advanced mapping, and of course some really good examples on how to structure the multi-layer lookup, which gets down to the 2 levels of lookup. When you're connecting from OpenAir to NetSuite, a huge thing to keep in mind, you can look up to 2 levels within tables. So let's say I want to map over a user's information, and I want to map over that user's supervisor. Let's say I want to look up that supervisor's department, and I want to map that information over. Well, that's digging into that 3rd layer that is not allowed in Suite Connect. And you'll see that across some NetSuite limitations as far as that multi-layer lookup. So that's where building out those custom API calls is a good workaround for it as well. One of the things that is valuable as far as the integration channels is the American Express integration. The American Express integration is something that you can do directly with OpenAir. They use what's called a KR1025. The KR1025 takes all your American Express transactions in statement form, dumps them into OpenAir, and allows your users to allocate those expenses to their appropriate GL account. While that is useful, that may be something that we look at using this alternative workaround to get the information into both systems rather than dumping into OpenAir, because what we found is if there are errors in any part of that data dump, you lose transactions and users have to implement and enter their time in material, just their material manually. And that workaround can be a little stressful and not very fun. So using American Express and integrating that with NetSuite and using those API calls to draw that information back to OpenAir. Again, another possible workaround. We haven't really fleshed that out again, so it's a future state kind of idea, but it's just something that I want to throw out there as part of using this style of thinking to get these workarounds to work. And again, the values of those points, I won't beat a dead horse, but again, you get it all and you get that consolidated granular reporting when you integrate the systems more fully. Some other ideas, again, American Express to NetSuite, using those further API calls to get that information in both systems for granular reporting out of both systems, and again, having less data disparity. ADP or human capital is management is something that has room for opportunity, I would say, in the NetSuite side. Getting those users information, I was talking about things that transfer over one time versus multiple times. There's room for data disparity there. So again, those integration points, using those API calls to work around Suite Connect to get a better idea of how these can connect with making it a little more seamless. And again, using that suite for Salesforce to OpenAir via Boomi is just another idea, because now that we know we can send that data back into NetSuite so seamlessly using Suite Connect, leveraging the two through a different angle. So just other ideas to look at through the same lens, the creative thinking of using advanced mapping, using Suite Connect, and of course using those API calls. So now we'll open it up to Q&A. Once I hand it back to Joanne, she'll have some final housekeeping things, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So thank you very much, everybody.
All right, thank you, Jimmy, for a great presentation. As he said, we will go to the Q&A session in just a second. So if anybody has any questions they'd like to submit, please do so now through that GoToWebinar console, which should be on the top right of your screen. Today's webcast is part of our ongoing educational webcast series. I have the schedule of upcoming events on the board for you now. If you'd like to register for any of those, please go out to www.getgsi.com/webcast. In addition to our webcast, I wanted to mention our educational resources. We do have an educational resource center where we upload recordings of all of the webcasts. And after today's webcast, you'll receive an email with a link to the resource center as well as a copy of the presentation. GSI also distributes monthly newsletters called the GSI Insider. You can sign up for those on our website as well. And finally, I'd like to mention our workshops. We do host workshops throughout the United States on a variety of topics within the within our services. So please keep an eye out for those. I would like to move to the Q&A session. So if anyone does have any questions, please go ahead and send those through now. We'll give it just a minute. All right, looks like we have a little bit of a quiet crowd. We'll give it another minute or two. But just wanted to mention that when you exit the webcast, we do have a quick survey that we ask that you please complete. And if you do so, you'll go into a drawing to win a $25 Amazon gift card. And we do take the survey seriously. We love to get your feedback, kind of find out what we are doing well, what we can do better, and we really appreciate the feedback. So, all right. Well, it looks like it's a pretty quiet crowd today, Jimmy. But thank you so much for a great presentation, and thanks all of you for attending. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Joanne.